Hello, 4C. Well, back again for more of this confusing and weird novel. Chapter 8, The Holy Forest, is where we're up to today. So it starts on page 219, goes through to page 240. Once again, I'm referring to question sheets. I didn't have a lot of questions about this chapter. Essentially, the chapter is about the sort of connection, a sort of exploration of the similarities and differences between Kip and Caravaggio. And that's done mainly by looking at how they relate to Hannah and how they both see their work. So that's the crux of the whole chapter. So we have this little thing on page 219 with the ladybird. That's just a sweet little image, I think. But from page 220, we have this moment where Caravaggio accidentally knocks over essentially a bomb, which is just casually lying on a table, as it will, and Kip catches it. And this is sort of the beginning of the chapter. So then from on page 221, 220 after that, we get a little insight into Caravaggio's style of thieving. Caravaggio, before the war, was a thief, and perhaps not a very good one. And there's a little thing on there that made me really laugh on page 221, where it says that he often had conversations with the various pets left alone in the house, rhetorically discussing meals with them, feeding them large helpings, and was often greeted by them with considerable pleasure if he returned to the scene of the crime. That made me laugh. So essentially he gets distracted by the human element in the experience of thieving. So he'll often get sort of caught up in what's going on with the people. Like, for example, if he would go into a house and see an advent calendar. I don't think the Dutch have advent calendars, but advent calendars are these sort of three-dimensional small box calendar things that children get in the weeks leading up to Christmas. And you open up, each day has a little like cardboard door, and you open it and then you get like a little chocolate or a little treat or something. And so he would be annoyed by things like people not opening their advent. So he's a very strange man, and then but very emotional, okay, which is in direct contrast, of course, with Kip. Then my first question on the handout asks you to summarize pages 222 to 228, and that's a flashback to 1941. Of course, the villa is 1945, so when they're all together is 1945. It's a flashback to 1941 where where Kip has to defuse a bomb, and this is another example of just the incredible detail with which Ondaatje deals with bomb diffusing. It's incredibly technical in places. Essentially what happens is he's very, very cold. He's 20 feet down, I think, in some sort, well, it says a pit, but it feels like more like a well or something. And he makes mistakes, then he succeeds, and there's that sort of emotional disconnect with him, as always happens. And when he finally gets pulled up and he's like freezing, he can barely walk, he spilled liquid oxygen on himself. I don't know enough about bombs to understand this, but he's just really, really cold, and he realizes that a crowd had gathered to watch him, I guess, or to sort of be near the process. And that if he had made a mistake, he would have sort of killed them all, not just himself. Of course, we've learned throughout the book that, typically you want to have everybody else far away from you when you're doing the whole bomb disposal thing. Like, he reacted really strongly when he needed Hannah's help to defuse that bomb earlier in the story, you remember. So he realizes, there's all these people there, but he doesn't really... my phone just goes off all the time, and it's always coronavirus stuff. There's a podcast from the Volkskrant about answering questions about the virus. Could be interesting. Good for my Dutch. Okay. So we again get that acknowledgement of that lack of emotion in Kip, and his sort of ability to really disconnect himself from his work and his feelings from his work. And then we learn more about Hardy. Now, of course, Hardy is blown up. He dies earlier in the story, and again, good old Kip barely reacts to this event. But here we learn a bit more about Hardy. Now, where did I? Oh yeah, here on page 225. So sort of, it starts. Kip smiled. So I'm here. Kip smiled. Kip smiled. He was 10 years younger than Hardy and no Englishman, but Hardy was happiest in the cocoon of regimental discipline. There was always hesitation by the officers to call him Sir, but Hardy barked it out loud and enthusiastically. So that's another reference to how poorly Kip is treated as an Indian man in the British military. So the men that are sort of beneath him in the order of things, so the men that his inferiors, like he's not an officer, I don't think, but he has men that are supposed to salute him and call him Sir, and there was and some of these sort of everyday soldiers hesitate to call him Sir because they're white men and he's Indian. And one of the things that Kip likes about Hardy is that he doesn't hesitate to call him Sir, which I think is an understandable feeling. And there's another thing I highlighted about Hardy is at the bottom of page 227 that Hardy hugs him when he gets him out of the pit after he successfully dismantled this bomb. So he's just, Hardy's really sort of emotional, or like I'm saying really emotional, but Hardy just seems like he's a sort of a normal, decent person, but he really helps Kip stay sane. And indeed, at the bottom of page 228, Kip reflects on how he was feeling when he was dismantling this bomb. At the very bottom of page 228, he thought, "I wasn't even frightened down there. I was just angry with my mistake or with the possibility that there was a joker, an animal reacting just to protect myself. Only Hardy, he realised, keeps me human now." So, yeah, Kip is really struggling with a disconnection with his emotions. I think is what makes him such a good bomb disposal officer. You don't want to be in connection with your fear. Fear is a very important human evolutionary experience, but it can be also a dangerous thing if it makes you sort of make mistakes and shake and drop things. And
keep going.
I'm not going to keep. I can't. Go away. I'm just being terrorized by this man in my life. Foresee. Okay. Number two. Question number two. Why does Caravaggio love Hannah more now that she's an adult? So we're going to skip a little bit. Was there anything? Oh yeah, they're washing their hair on page 229, talking a little bit about Kip's brother, which comes up again at the end of the chapter, so we learn more about that relationship there, which we'll come back to later. But they're essentially the thing that really separates Kip from his brother is that Kip trusts the English and his brother doesn't. That's going to be important at the end. So the treatment of sort of Western countries, Europe and America, North America, to Asian countries is going to be important, because there's going to be the moment will come where the atomic bomb is dropped on Japan, and that's sort of an important moment to remember is coming up in the story for Kip. Okay. Oh yeah, we're getting more here about good old Kip. At the bottom of page 230, it's talking about how he walked up Italy with eyes that tried to see everything except what was temporary and human. So I feel like he's maybe overemphasizing this a little bit here. We've got the picture, but Kip is only interested in bomb disposal. He's not interested in in connecting with other people. It says in the years of the war, he has learned that the only thing safe is himself. So he's really, really totally disconnected from the human element. Now, question number 2. Why does Caravaggio love Hannah more now that she is an adult? Page 234 and 235. At the bottom of 234, he says she had grown older, and he loved her more now than he loved her when he had understood her better, when she was the product of her parents. What she was now was what she herself had decided to become. He knew that if he had passed Hannah on a street in Europe, she would have had a familiar air, but he would not have recognized her. Not this wonderful stranger he could love more deeply because she was made up of nothing he had provided. He loves her because she's become who she wants to be. She's no longer a child and no longer molded by the surroundings and experiences provided by her parents and provided by Caravaggio, who was very good friends with her parents, and so she's sort of made a decision about who she is, which he likes very much. Now, the rest of the chapter is this there's a strange game that they play, which I found a bit weird, to be honest. Question number 3 is, and I've sort of been talking and dancing around this question all the way through what I've been talking to you about today. How are Caravaggio and Kip different? Think the nature of their professions and how they connect with people. So essentially, Kip is completely disconnected. He's got no emotions. His profession is a noble one, so his work is really important, but he doesn't really do it to save lives, I don't think. He doesn't really seem to care that much about saving lives. So what he does is really noble, but he does it in this sort of emotionless way that he doesn't care about people at all. He has a real wall up, and he really sections himself off. And he's trying to protect himself emotionally, and that's why meeting Hannah is really undoing those walls. And there is a link between Kip and the English Patient, because next chapter we'll go back to the relationship between the English Patient and Catherine, that love affair that he had in Cairo, and what she found incredibly frustrating about him is that he would never, she felt like he never really let her in. She really had to bang down his walls, and the whole experience really destabilizes him and really undermines his sort of sense as a completely independent creature with no real connections to other human beings. So there's some connections between Kip and the English Patient, I think. Meanwhile, Caravaggio is maybe too connected, too emotional. His work is the opposite of Kip's. Kip is this very noble, honourable profession. He's saving lives, putting his own life at risk to save the lives of others. Whereas Caravaggio is stealing from people, but he, does things like feed the pets, and this sort of sweet things he sort of gets caught up to, and sort of makes him bad at his job, bad at his work. He's a noble person, but he participates in a criminal profession. So that's really interesting. It's important to note that there's no judgment from the author or the narrator about these different things, he's not necessarily saying it's bad or good that Kip doesn't have these connections with people. He's just sort of saying it like it is. So that's really interesting. So, you're not supposed to necessarily, you're certainly left to make your own conclusions about these characters. Question number 4. In what ways is the love between Hannah and Kip deepening in this chapter? So we see it's no longer about sexual satisfaction. So I'm talking about pages 237 to the end of the chapter. He's linking Hannah to moments in his childhood when he felt really, really safe. There's some beautiful images and this sort of back scratching thing with his ayah. Now an ayah is sort of a maid servant and nanny in India. So it's his maid who was doing all the looking after him. His parents are wealthy and I think very caring, but maybe a little bit distant. So a lot of the physical, like the hugs and the kisses and the sort of day-to-day care was left to this Aya, this maid, and he really, really loved her. And then he's sort of connecting that with her. He's feeling very comfortable and safe with her, and maybe that's opening him up a little bit. But of course, what Kip is dealing with two really serious things throughout the novel. He's dealing with a growing awareness of his own sort of emotional lack of connection or inability to connect with people, and also with the racism that he's dealing with on a regular basis. And Hannah and he will always be from completely different places. And the novel always mentions that they're representatives of two different continents, and always sort of contrasts their skin color. And she's always sort of admiring his dark skin and his dark hair and that exoticism. So in some ways there's maybe a little bit of objectification coming from Hannah's side of things. But again, the author doesn't necessarily criticize that. It's just, it is what it is. Okay, I think that's all I really need to say about this chapter. I don't even know why it's called The Holy Forest, so there's a mystery for you. If any of you can tell me that, I'd appreciate it. Next lesson, I'm going to talk to you about Chapter 9, The Cave of Swimmers. We're back into the drama of the English patient and Catherine. We learn more about how their connection developed and all the freaky stuff they got up to. So, I'll see you guys then. Be good. Bye.